Hi, Smart News. I'm so excited for today. So many of our top news stories really center around the actions, the behaviors, the words coming from the U.S. government. So who better to speak to about this than America's government teacher, Sharon McMahon? You may know her as Sharon Says So, and she's our guest today. We had a big speech from the president last night, his first major address to Congress, his first 100 days in office. So we're going to use that as a little bit of a news hook to get into a broader conversation about what we might actually see from the U.S. government this year. So I don't want to wait. I want to go ahead and get Sharon in here because we have a lot of questions for her. And by the way, it's not just going to be my questions. I'd like to get some of your questions as well, because that's where a lot of the fun happens, doesn't it? We'll see. How's everyone doing today? I'll have to tell you guys, it has been a little bit of a crazy day.
Let's see if we can get Sharon in, and we'll talk to Sharon about, I have a couple of questions just for Sharon as well, about how she got into doing what she's doing. And well, is she here?
Hello.
I feel like I'm in a little bit of a twilight zone. I'm
Like,
seeing
what is happening?
something. I'm seeing a green screen. I'm hearing you. Wait, there she is.
Oh, hello. I'm like, what? Where is it? Hi.
I don't know. It might be contagious. Whatever I'm dealing with this morning might actually be contagious. So like cross your heart and kiss your elbow and just like hope
I'm
for the
not going
best.
to get it through the phone.
Do we run Instagram accounts? Like, do we run a technology platform? I know. How are you today, Sharon?
I am great. It's a sunny day. I cannot complain.
Okay, that's great. In Minnesota, no less.
It's a sunny day here in Minnesota.
Love it. I love it. You know, Minnesota has a special place in my heart because my dad played for the Vikings, Sharon, way back when.
I did not know that.
Yes. And my dad has some really interesting stories. It was one of the first few years as the NFL was the NFL. And, you know, everyone has that story from a parent that's like, I remember when I had to walk to school through 10 miles of snow. So my dad's stories are, these guys play indoors. Like no one played indoors. We played out in the elements. We were out on the practice fields. Mosquitoes were biting us through our uniform in Minnesota. And in Minnesota, they're this big.
Yes.
So it has a special place. I feel like Minnesota is a little
connection.
bit. I do.
Yes.
Are you a Vikings fan? Do you do any of the sports?
I hate football. Which is great because my son is a football player, so one can understand what a fantastic position this puts me in. No, I have no shade against the Vikings. I don't even understand it. I don't understand how football even works. Why does this take so long? Do you know what I mean?
I get it. Different strokes for different folks.
Yeah.
And here we are, you know, good on your son for like teaching his mom a little something.
Well, yes,
maybe
the first football game, high school football game I ever went to, my mom was there with me, and I clapped when everybody else in our section clapped. And then halftime happened, and I'm like, well, that was good. And I like got up to leave, and my mom was like, is halftime? And I'm like, it has been 2 hours. How long is this game?
I get it. I totally get it.
It's totally on me.
My kiddos, so you have 4 kids.
Yes.
That's a lot, Sharon.
That's a lot of children.
Yeah.
So,
I'm
40
sure
pounds of offspring that I have given birth to.
I'm sure I'm not yet in the stage with my 3 that they're doing a lot of organized sports yet. So I haven't ridden off like my entire life at this point, but I know it's coming. So I look to you for advice. Okay. Yes. I have a couple questions for you. A burning question that I've had for a very long time.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the name Sharon Says So? Where is that from?
Okay, so my account mostly used to just be focused on my photography business, and it was named after my photography business, and I wanted to talk about more things other than just like, here's some pictures that I took. And it was actually one of my friends, Kelly, who came up with the idea, and about 16 months ago, like last February of 2020, I changed it to Sharon Says So. That was her idea, and I was like, I like it. And it was also available. So here we are.
So there it goes. Okay, so Sharon Says So, which is interesting because one of my other questions for you, I was curious. I thought, I wonder where Sharon was with her business and all of this April 2020 of last year.
Hmm.
What were you doing? What was this account like? And just tell us a little bit about your life then.
Yeah. Well, okay. So 2020 has been an interesting year for all humans on planet Earth, obviously. But then when you coupled in the fact that my husband, last April of 2020, was in kidney failure and was waiting to get a kidney transplant. And in April of 2020, I was going through the process of trying to donate one of my kidneys to him. So I had spent days getting, the amount of testing that you have to have done to be able to donate a kidney. It's like literally 25 vials of blood, CT scans. I mean, the amount of testing. So we were very focused on that and very focused on trying to keep him safe because at the time, there was absolutely no knowledge of what something like COVID could do to somebody in kidney failure. And also there was no knowledge about whether or not somebody who had had COVID could donate a kidney, because some viruses lie dormant in your body and can reawaken. And there are some viruses that they test you for that would, if you are positive for it, even if you don't have an active infection, it precludes you from donating. So in April of last year, we were very, very focused on no one in our family can get sick to protect my husband, Chris. And then, of course, there were a lot of, mandated shutdowns and things like that in Minnesota. So, yeah, life was extremely different a year ago.
So how is Chris doing? And what was the end result of that process?
Yeah, he's doing okay. My mom, I ended up not being eligible to donate a kidney to him because they found one 2 millimeter kidney stone in one of my kidneys, completely asymptomatic, like never had any issues with it. But just knowing that you can even make kidney stones, that your body does that for your own safety. They don't want to leave you in a situation where you only have one kidney and then you have a kidney stone that blocks your one kidney and your one kidney dies. And they work really hard to try to make sure that the donor will be safe and healthy after the donation. So what ended up happening was my mom, who has crazily healthy kidneys, ended up donating one of her kidneys to a stranger in Wisconsin as part of a paired match. And my husband got a kidney from a stranger in Texas. And, just this whole, they arrange all of that. You don't have to find it. They do all of the arrangements as part of the paired match program. And so he had a kidney transplant last August.
Wow.
And so it's been an interesting winter with him being incredibly immunocompromised, because you'll be immunosuppressed for the rest of your life after an organ transplant. And then it just being like so cold and all those things in Minnesota. It's been an interesting winter around here, but he's doing well, and it's nice to finally see the being able to spend some time outdoors again.
It does kind of lift everybody's spirits.
Absolutely.
Wow, what an experience. I'm glad that he's doing all right. I'm sure that was challenging on so many different levels.
Absolutely.
As you mentioned, in the middle of a global pandemic. So
Yes.
If I was to say to you last year at this time, hey, Sharon, guess what? By next year, you're going to have more than 600,000 followers on Instagram. You're kind of going to be this media sensation, America's government teacher. What would you have said to me at that time? Would you have believed that was coming down the pipe?
Not at all. This is absolutely one of those left turns that I could not have foreseen it. And I'm so grateful for it. But it's a great illustration of, like, your earring falls off in the middle of a live. That's a great illustration of that.
Yes.
Just like,
It happens.
It's a great illustration, though, of, even no matter how difficult your current circumstances, you truly don't know what is around the corner. And had COVID not happened, which again, I fully acknowledge was terrible, had that not happened, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And so I really believe strongly in the idea of, like, everything that happens to you in your life is going to be used someday. You don't necessarily know how. How might be like mind-blowing to you, how might be something that you don't realize until later, but it is going to be used. And so I am grateful for the experience, of this difficult year, because it's led me here. I'm going to take this other earring off.
You've connected with so many people and been such a source of support for so many during this really dynamic time. Do you remember that moment when you thought to yourself, I really love it. I really love learning about the US government. Like this is really striking a chord with me. Was there a moment like that for you?
I was in 11th grade. I was in 11th grade, and I had a fantastic teacher in 11th grade who would tape on a VHS tape. Would tape.
Should I draw what that looks like for some of our audience? Because I remember.
Who would tape
it looked like this.
Yeah.
You put it in
yeah,
a
they're
box.
approximately the size of a loaf of bread. Would tape on a VHS tape the nightly news every night. And he would then bring in that VHS tape every day to our 11th grade social studies class and would show us clips of it. He would have like the times written down and been like, okay, we're going to watch 1 minute 30 to 3 minutes 20 seconds, and then and then he would fast forward to the next section, because you had to actually fast forward. But that absolutely ignited just a passion for me that has never really waned. I was the teenager who took my babysitting money and bought a subscription to Newsweek. You know what I mean? Like that was how nerdy I was in high school. There weren't a lot of kids like me, and that's, again, I take that experience as like, yeah, now all the weird kids of the world, you guys can all come to my account. Like we will all be the weird kids of the world, and look at us now. All those popular people are probably
it wasn't
somewhere.
You were ahead of your time. You're ahead of your time in 11th grade, looking forward into Newsweek. So after 11th grade, was your first job really going into teaching? Was that the first career step that you took?
Yes, I became a high school teacher after college. Yes, and have worked in Minnesota and in on both the left and right coasts, and taught in a variety of different schools. My very first day as a high school teacher was in a very rough school in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I thought I was Michelle Pfeiffer, because I'd be like Dangerous Minds. Michelle
right.
Pfeiffer.
And the leather jacket and the music.
Mm-hmm.
I remember. Yeah.
Yep. And I'm just going to turn all of these children away from their bad trajectory, and we're going to be like reading poetry in the park, like a lot of very idealistic teachers think that's what's going to happen. And I walked into the classroom on my very first day and was like, hey, you guys find a seat, like big smile, really friendly. And one boy looked at me and like leaned against the back chalkboard and refused to sit down. And I said, like, hey, would you mind finding a seat? I wasn't even trying to tell him where to sit. I was just like, sit wherever. And he looked
on
at
the
me.
floor.
Yeah. I won't repeat the word because this is live and there might be children watching, but he said, I'm not going to sit down, you ugly. And then he called me a very not good name. And I was like, and you're like running through in your mind, like, how am I supposed to handle this? Because you can't just be like, oh, okay, no problem. And just be like, it's fine. But you also can't create a massive power struggle in the middle of at the very first day of school, in the very first 2 minutes of the very first day of school. So that was really my baptism by fire as an educator. Was like, I'm not going to sit down, you ugly, very derogatory name for women.
Yes, I can imagine that was unexpected, and well, you learn a lot as a teacher, right?
Absolutely.
And you meet a lot of different students, and you learn how to. My mom was a teacher for 40 years, and you learn to identify different students and how to speak to them. And I wonder how your experience, and we'll tie back to the news in a moment. I wonder how your experience in the classroom has informed what you're doing now. Like what lessons have you pulled from it that you feel are really effective to what you're doing now and trying to really help educate people about a whole host of different current events?
Yeah. I use my teacher skills all day, every day. You know, like, again, another great example of how you don't know what you're, you know, the skills you're learning now, you cannot predict how you're going to use them in the future. So one of the things that I really set out to do as a young teacher was I did not want my students to ever know who I voted for or what I felt was the right answer to like a problem that was, you know, vexing society. And the reason for that was I never wanted students to feel like I just told them what to think. To me, it would be like a math teacher just being like, the answer to number 7 is 326. Please write down the answer to number 9 is X. A good math teacher shows you how to do the work on your own and equips you with the skills to arrive at the right conclusion, right? The correct answer. A good math teacher doesn't just tell you what the answers are. So I still, to this day, align with that idea that my goal is not to try to tell you what to think. It's to help you learn how to think about an issue, so that you can arrive at, you know, like a well-educated viewpoint instead of just being able to parrot back what I tell you to think.
How challenging is that to do on a regular basis, given the content, the types of stories that we're tackling and seeing on a regular basis? They're not just like the weather. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
right.
It's like
well, rain, it's so sweaty today.
right. It's like a global
Yes.
pandemic or, you know, a riot at the Capitol, or, you know, they're really complicated in a
Yeah.
lot of ways.
Yes.
How challenging has that been to kind of wrap your hands around it and figure out a way to do what you want to do, what your calling is to do, which is to help people learn a little bit about all angles and then come to their own conclusion?
Well, you would know, Jenna,
I do.
right?
Well, I know how to do it in my way, right? Which
You do it in a different way.
it's a
Yes.
different. Well, it's in a like in a journalism way that I approach these stories. It is a discipline, and it is sometimes a pattern that you fall into. However, I will say this past year has really challenged me on so many different levels, just simply by bandwidth, right? Because
Yes.
every time you think that maybe, just maybe, there's not something that's going to happen Wednesday night at 1 o'clock in the morning, you are wrong. Something is going to happen.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's been challenging. So I asked this question because I know, I mean, that's really, yeah, it's definitely been a challenge.
It is a discipline, but it is one of those disciplines that it gets easier the more you do it. You know, and so I did this for so long in the classroom on a daily basis for many hours a day. You know, literally, if you're a government teacher and you're teaching 5 classes for a minimum of 5 hours a day, you are practicing this skill and not shying away from difficult issues. If you want to be a government teacher, these are real issues that have actual impact on real human beings. We're not talking about fairy tales here. So you have to be able to talk about real issues and still have kids walk away and be like, I don't know, I tried to figure it out, I can't figure it out. You know, like I want everyone to feel like at some point I'm going to push your button. You know what it is? Like there's no safe viewpoint. I'm going to push your button at some point.
Yes, I get that. I totally understand that. And I was just thinking there's no summer break. That was nice about school, right? Like the class ended and then sometimes you'd be out for the summer and you get a breather. I don't think anyone's had that much of a break. Well, I know there's a lot of people with a lot of questions, so I'm going to keep looking at this.
Yes.
But I want to just kind of bring us back into what we're looking at today, because we've been talking a little bit, going back and forth for the last several weeks, and I was like, Sharon, I want a little something that kind of gets us off and running on a conversation so we can talk about some of these broader themes about political will, which you've talked about so well. That's really helpful to navigate news stories and look at things with a little bit more of an analytical eye instead of like getting caught up in these constant headlines and debate. The president addressed Congress last night. It's the first time we've seen this in this particular way, by the way, right? With not necessarily a full room. This isn't a State of the Union because that doesn't happen during a president's first term, at least according to recent tradition. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? What is tradition? How often do we see a president give a joint address to Congress? Why is it significant?
Yeah. Okay. So the Constitution says from time to time, the president will address Congress. It doesn't say a date It doesn't say, you know, like it just, that's the specification is from time to time. So what we have now are traditions about how things have been done. And you have seen Biden take a little bit of a break from tradition, where generally speaking, that kind of speech would be given in January, maybe February of the year, and a variety of reasons, maybe why they chose to delay. Some of it had to do, I know, with COVID. Some of it had to do with security at the Capitol. There may be other reasons that we're not privy to about why they chose to delay. But that's the tradition. Is it's just because of the constitutional requirement for an address from time to time.
So when you heard that this address was happening, what were you watching for?
Okay, so one of the big things that I was like very curious to hear more about was the new kind of American Families Plan that he has been teasing about, but the actual specifics of which have just been speculated on. People knew that there was going to be something related to childcare. There was going to be something related to, community college or universal pre-K. So there were these general concepts that had been floated, but I was very curious to hear more about what kind of specifics he might get into related to these plans that he has.
Anything in particular of those things? Because he mentioned, okay, I think we should have some education, more additional years of free education for kids, for example. So a couple extra preschool years, couple community college years.
Yes.
We need to have daycare. We need to extend the tax credit, as you mentioned. Anything in particular there that you were like, aha, that's an interesting concept, and one that maybe there's momentum behind.
Mm-hmm. Well, he really talked about his two plans that he has moving forward. One is his infrastructure plan that he's calling the American Jobs Plan. And one is, of course, the American Families Plan, all related to things like education and childcare credits and things along those lines. And one of the statistics that I heard him say about the American Jobs Plan that I was like, that is interesting. I didn't know that. I hadn't thought of that, which is that he wants to create millions of jobs. And of course, part of that is through a huge investment in America's infrastructure, things like roads and replacing water pipes and that kind of thing. And he said in his speech that 90% of the jobs will not require a bachelor's degree, and that 75% will not require an associate's degree, but that the jobs are going to be what he said are good paying jobs. So that was something that I had not seen, that specific statistic before. And I was like, that is interesting. I'm curious to know more about those projections, about where all those jobs are going to be, what job sectors those are going to be. But it was very clear that he was catering to the blue collar workers of America. He even said that America was not built by Wall Street. It was built by the middle class. And it was very clear when you watched it or read it that that's who he was talking to last night.
So we have these two really large plans, and
very large.
The past administrations, many of them have talked about infrastructure plans. They were like, we're going to, because everyone knows what it's like to drive over a pothole. And it's kind of annoying, or be worried about going across a bridge and being like, is this really going to hold us? These are some things that are really important to people. And yet it's not exactly the most exciting thing in the news, right? It's hard,
Pipes.
it doesn't,
not that exciting.
So we have that big plan, and you have this other plan that, as you mentioned, the families plan. What will it actually take to get these big ideas from the president? And by the way, we did link through it on our website as well. I'm sure you linked to it. You can go in and read all the details of the plans, and it's a lot of reading. It's not like a one-sheeter.
Oh, no.
These are highly detailed. What will it actually take to get those from these ideas to actual legislation that would pass and that would end up being applied?
Well, there's really two separate routes that the administration can take. And I can almost guarantee you that they're going to try route one, that's not going to be successful, and they're going to go back to route two and then be able to be like, well, we tried route one, that didn't work. Right? So the two routes to get something like this passed, one would be to potentially adjust some of the plans and come up with some kind of bipartisan compromise plan between, and you've seen the Republicans have already proposed a compromise plan on the jobs, the infrastructure bill that he would like to have passed. So his idea is that we need to spend trillion plus dollars on it. The Republican idea is that we should spend more like $500 billion on it. And so you probably will see some meetings take place. You may see you may see the Biden plan get adjusted because they need to get, have every single Democrat on board in order, if they want to get it passed. They would like to have Republican support for it. So they're probably going to try this route. But then what is more likely to happen is using the process of budget reconciliation to push it through Congress. Now that the Senate parliamentarian has said that they can adjust the budget reconciliation instructions, it gives them the opportunity to push more spending bills through the Senate without the filibuster.
So it's a lower barrier
Yes.
that they have to get through, a lower
Correct.
barrier of convincing senators to get on board.
Correct.
That would allow this to move. So budget reconciliation, just in case someone's like, listen, I've covered Congress for, I don't want to even say how long at this point, because I feel like it's getting longer. These are terms, even people throw around the term filibuster, budget reconciliation. I don't want to bore everyone with this right now, because it is a little bit boring, guys. It is. I'm just going to tell you. But it's actually a reminder that we think sometimes that the government is so structured and it's so precise and it has all these things, and you're going to check this box and that's how a bill's going to pass. And everybody knows that. But then you realize it's actually not like that, Sharon, right? It's complicated, and also it moves, and like traditions are made and then followed and broken, and right? I mean, how would you kind of describe that? Because it is a very eye-opening thing to learn about. That's it's like, wow, when you really think someone's an adult, like how you thought about adults when you were a kid, you're like, wow, they really have it together. And then you become an adult and you're like, I don't have it together. Right?
Yes.
Right? A little bit like that. I'm just, maybe I'm projecting.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was a kid feeling like my mom legitimately knew everything. And, like as a small child, not so much as a teenager, but as a small child, I remember, because my mom literally knew the answer to every question I ever had. Right. What road are we driving on right now? Oh, how do you even know that? Like my little mind would be blown of like, how do you have every road memorized?
So in this case, the Senate parliamentarian is sort of like, kind of like the parent saying to the lawmakers, this is what you actually can do.
Yes.
If you want to get this bill passed and not get the typical amount of votes to move it through debate to then get voted on.
Yes.
I mean, that's my sort of understanding.
She is kind of like, a third party, like mom when two children are squabbling, like who should have a turn to play with this toy? It's a little bit like that. The difference, of course, is that what the Senate parliamentarian says, and if you're not familiar with this, it is a job that is created. There's a separate one in the House, and their sole role is to interpret and enforce the rules of Congress, which are incredibly complicated. You think it's just like show up and argue and vote, and it's not. But so they have their own office, they do their own research, and they issue, opinions on what should happen. Now, are their opinions legally binding? No, they don't have to obey the parliamentarian. They can, in fact, purposely disobey the parliamentarian, but she is kind of the arbiter between squabbling siblings.
Is she appointed? Does she change over with different administrations?
She is hired. Well, there's a separate one in the House, but Elizabeth McDonough is her name. And she is hired, not appointed by the president, hired by the actual Senate itself. And they do not generally change over with presidents. It's a nonpartisan position, and they stay in the position obviously as long at the pleasure of the Senate and as long as they want to. Famously, there have been in the past, like in the 80s and 90s, where senators did not like the ruling of the parliamentarian, and they were like, let's get a different parliamentarian, and wanted to let them go and get somebody different. But this is the kind of role that a lot of the American public is like, parliamentarian what?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're not a public official in the way that you would see them on TV. They're not giving interviews. So they're very behind the scenes.
It's very fascinating. So, what do you think are the chances? The big infrastructure bill, maybe another. I don't. It's kind of weird to call it the families bill. I don't even know how to kind of generalize it. But what do you think are the chances of seeing either of these actually move as legislation through Congress?
I think the chances are pretty good, because there is so much political will behind behind pushing them through Congress. I think that the chances of them getting pushed through via the budget reconciliation process, which only would require, again, without going into all the boring rules of the Senate, would only require a 50 vote threshold and not a 60 vote threshold. So yeah, I think the chances are pretty good that you will see some version of these bills. It may not be the precise bill that you see now, but some version of these bills get moved through because there is so much political will behind them.
It's interesting. You look at the bills, and we like to talk about laws, legislation. It's really easy to forget that it's our money that's being spent.
It is.
It's all and it's a good reminder.
People are like, where does all this money come from? Are we just printing more? Are we just taking out mortgages? Like, how does it work? It is our money. It's taxpayer money.
Yes.
And the plan doesn't call for, taxes being raised on, income taxes being raised on the middle class. The plan largely calls to pay for itself via additional taxes on the wealthy. And it's easy as a middle class person to be like, yeah, Jeff Bezos should pay $42 billion. That's what should happen. You know what I mean? It's easy to just tell other people that, yes, we want those other people to pay more. I don't want to pay more, but those other people should pay more because they can afford it. But there are trade-offs when you are taxing a certain group more heavily. There's trade-offs to that. It's not a consequence-free choice. But yes, it's all taxpayer money.
It's just an important reminder because there are different ways to try to fund this. That'll be part of the debate. You said that you believe there's political will. Why do you think political will is there? And why is political will fundamental to any legislation getting through Congress?
Yeah. Well, okay. So this concept, political science concept of political will, it's just like the core motivation, like the actual motivation to take this big, heavy object and push it up the hill. If you're not really motivated to do it, like you think about CrossFit, like, pushing these giant tires or, like the big ship ropes. If you're like, I don't care about being fit, that doesn't matter to me, then you don't have any motivation to push this monster truck tire. But if you really have this goal of like, I have a competition where, like I need to get in shape, you're going to be motivated to actually do that incredibly hard work. So it's a lot of work to get legislation passed. And I don't necessarily just mean that it's hard to vote. It's just really hard to get everybody to agree on something. And it's a lengthy process. So there has to be that motivation behind something. There are, so many thousands of bills introduced in front of Congress every year, and 90+% of them will never even be debated. They'll never even make it out of committee. And a lot of that is just because there's no political will behind it. There's not that chunk of people, a large enough chunk of people who are like, yes, let's do it. You know what I mean? They're just like, oh, that is nice. Like, could I introduce a bill if I were in Congress? Could I introduce a bill to be like, let's make the national lip gloss of America this one? You know what I mean? Like, sure, I could, but where's the political will to make that happen? There's no motivation. So I do think the Democrats have a lot of motivation to push these bills through Congress, a strong amount of motivation to do that. And that is why I think they're likely to probably pass in some form via budget reconciliation.
This is such an interesting question on our feed right now. If you're benefiting from it, so benefiting from these bills and paying for it at the same time, then what's the point? Does it all come out in the wash? It's a great question,
yeah,
right?
It's a fair question. Like, does it come out in the wash?
Right.
That's a fair question. And so obviously people have different perspectives on if it's worth it to create these kind of governmental programs. Some people feel like, let me keep my money and I will spend it how I want. And that is, that tends to be a viewpoint that more aligns with people who identify as conservatives. And the other side, the side that identifies more liberal, feels like it is the government's job to help people, particularly the, marginalized or the poor, help them have some kind of basic standards that they may have difficulty providing for themselves. So those are kind of like the two opposing viewpoints on the role of government in spending money. So if you are somebody who is super wealthy, you absolutely are going to pay more money in than you will ever get back in government programs. You probably will not even qualify for any of the government programs. You know what I mean? But if you are somebody who is the working poor, you have a full-time job, but you are making, maybe you're working a minimum wage job, you absolutely will benefit more than you would pay in. A lot of the working poor end up not paying income taxes because of tax credits and things along those lines. So whether or not you benefit at the same level as you pay very much depends on your current status, as your current economic status.
Very interesting, and
Mm-hmm.
such an important point to remember. So the president spent most of his time on these two really big legislations. They're trying to make the cornerstone of what the White House is pushing
Mm-hmm.
through. They've had a
Mm-hmm.
very, very busy first 100 days. Obviously, a lot of debate over some of the choices that they made. Those will continue. He
Absolutely.
did touch on a lot of different hot topics,
Yes.
but sort of briefly.
Yes.
Touched a little bit on gun laws, touched a little bit on immigration.
Yep.
Asked
China,
for corporate,
Russia.
right? Like, boom,
Yes.
boom, boom.
Yes.
Yeah, you're like, okay, got it. And this is why as a journalist, I like watching these speeches, because if you give someone a microphone and say, okay, make the choice, like, what are you going to talk about? It's interesting to see what editorial decisions they're making, how much time they're focusing on. We've gotten a lot of questions on this feed and others about these kind of swift mentions. And so, Sharon, whether it's comprehensive immigration reform, we've heard a lot about before. We've heard about gun laws as well. Do you think political will, because the political will to get together and figure out how to fund, road projects, and yes, there could be differences on that, but they're not topics like immigration and the border.
In the same
They're
way.
not quite as controversial,
Mm-hmm.
correct? So, what do you think about the political will for some of these hot topics?
Mm-hmm. I think there is a lot of political will to do things like have some kind of police reform, gun reform. There's a lot, I think, in fact, both sides would like to have discussions about these things. How should we change policing in America? They may not arrive at the same conclusion, but I think both sides really feel like this is something we need to talk about. Both sides feel like immigration is something we need to talk about, and they may have differing conclusions at the end of that conversation. And one of the more challenging things about those types of topics, like police reform, like immigration, like gun control, is that even if there is a tremendous amount of political will on the part of Republicans to change, significantly alter the trajectory of immigration, or if there's a significant amount of political will on the part of the Democrats to enact some kind of gun restriction, you can't rely on the process of budget reconciliation to push those things through the Senate. You have to have something that requires, like you have to come up with a plan that could garner 60 votes, because those are the current rules of the Senate. That's not how it's always been. That's not in the Constitution. Those are rules they decided on for themselves, because the Senate makes their own rules. So does the House, and the House doesn't use the filibuster. They just require a simple majority. So until you have 60 senators who are willing to say, this is what we should do about police reform. This is what we should do about unionization. This is what we should do about healthcare or immigration or whatever it is. It doesn't matter that much how much the Republicans want to do it or the Democrats want to do it. Because of the current Senate rules, it makes it much more difficult to actually see systemic or serious change on those issues.
Interesting. So the budget reconciliation works for certain legislation that qualifies, but for other legislation, it doesn't really work.
That's right.
And the parliamentarian is like, no,
that's right.
It's not going to work.
Yeah.
And so that holds it up. Jillian had a great question, and I encourage our audience, any questions you have for Sharon, I'm happy to be the conduit. Jillian was asking about timeline. Whatever legislation we're talking about, Sharon, is there a basic timeline for legislation to get passed? Do you have a thought of what's the quickest legislation you've ever seen go through? Boom, boom, boom. What is the timeline for any of this?
I mean, theoretically, there's nothing that would stop Congress from passing something in a day if every single member was like, let's do it. You know what I mean? Of course, but the problem is, of course, that's not a thing that actually happens in America. So theoretically, it could happen very quickly. What more often ends up happening is it goes through a pretty arduous process of sitting in a committee and having committee hearings and marking up the bill and allowing people who are not on that committee to weigh in, and then scheduling it for a vote. And, the actual process, not using budget reconciliation. If you're not going to use that process only allows you to pass bills that are related to taxing and spending. It doesn't allow you to pass bills that are things like immigration reform. So not using the budget reconciliation process, it generally takes months, many months for to get any kind of movement on something. But then again, 90% of those bills die.
Right.
They don't even go anywhere.
You know what I'm thinking though, as we're speaking, there's another timeline to consider, which is that Congress and House of Representatives is up for election every 2 years. So even when there's a little bit of quiet and you feel like you're not in an election period, for those representatives, often they're just on the verge of another one. And so that gives them a little extra motivation to try to do something, because they're like, oh, I got to run for re-election. I got to have something to talk about. So again, looking at the menu of what lies in front of us as a country, whether it's infrastructure plan or a families plan or immigration, gun laws, police reform, what do you think is the menu item that lawmakers would think, this is the most politically expedient for me? I'm going to have the political will to push it. With so many big topics.
Yes. If you're a Democrat, it is going to be moving those plans through Congress, because you are going to run on, look at what we have achieved in the last 1 year. That's kind of your golden ticket there. These plans tend to be relatively popular with Americans. The majority of Americans approve at least of some aspects of these plans. So if you're a Democrat, your goal is going to be get these plans through Congress, because I need to have this as an achievement that I can take back to my home district and say, I did this. If you are a Republican, your main goal is going to be to try to oppose the party in power, which is the Democrats, of course. Your main goal is going to be to try to oppose things that you disagree with, and to continue to highlight why we shouldn't have new gun control measures. I'm the candidate that kept those things from passing. I'm the candidate who fought for your gun rights. I'm the candidate who, you know what I'm saying here, where your goal, because you're not the party in power, because you know that you cannot personally, wield enough power to push something through Congress, you're going to position yourself as the party that opposed what they view as all of these bad ideas are.
Interesting. Do you think so along with those two kind of sides, we've had this question come up in a few different stories about whether or not a government solution actually exists for really any of these issues, right? Because you can have immigration. I mean, immigration is not a great example because that's really with the federal government, but you can have
is a great example.
Yeah. So there's differences based, for example, on states or how I'm just thinking about how legal solutions or legislative solutions can exist at a state level, but they can also exist in the federal government as well. And there's been a question about who knows best for the community that that they're serving,
Yeah.
for COVID, for example. COVID
Yep.
restrictions are very different
Yes.
depending on the states. And there's been a question about that. Some of these issues are federal government issues, like immigration. But do you think the federal government has been empowered by this time period, Sharon, to step forward as like a problem solver? Or do you think the federal government and that tension between the states is still kind of alive and well on who really is the problem solver for the country?
Well, that tension has existed literally since this country's inception.
Yes.
Like that is literally since 1776 has been a tension and will continue to be a tension that exists in American society. What is the role of the feds versus what jobs are the states' jobs? How much control should the states be willing to relinquish to the feds? Like that has always been and will continue to be for all eternity a
Do you
question.
think with all the big programs that the government has done over and obviously through the administration with President Trump as well, do you think you think that the tone of the country has changed at all to turn more towards the federal government rather than turn towards their state when we're thinking about how do we improve as a country?
I do think that you saw, particularly even in Biden's speech last night, you saw how Biden was offering the federal government as a solution for these problems that we're having. And so he is clearly wanting to have a legacy that is similar to that of FDR's or LBJ's, in which he wants large amounts of government involvement in not so much in terms of let me write a law that makes it so you can't wear the color blue, but in terms of economic programs in particular, that the government is the solution. You saw him say even last night, trickle down economics has never worked and doesn't work. That's his position. And if you're not familiar, trickle down economics is the concept of having low taxes for top earners and for corporations who then theoretically turn around and take those tax cuts and pass them on down. They trickle down into the middle class, into the lower class by creating more jobs, investments, and opportunities. So that's kind of this concept that Ronald Reagan was, presented to the American public. And that is what Biden last night said doesn't work in his opinion.
Yes.
So yes, I do think you are seeing similarly, when the Great Depression happened, one of the reasons FDR was so tremendously successful at beating Hoover, if you look at that electoral map, there were only maybe 5 states that Hoover won, and the entire country was blue in the FDR election, with the exception of just like a couple little, Pennsylvania, a couple little pops of red. One of the reasons he was so tremendously successful is because he offered the government as a solution, and people felt like at the time in the 30s, they felt like something has to be done. We cannot continue the way we are. So do we have the same level of popularity for the idea of a government solution now? No, it's not anywhere near what it was after the Great Depression. But I do think you've seen that pendulum swing slightly back towards that idea of it is the job of the government to help with these problems. And you've seen more Americans feel like, I agree with that. I agree with this stimulus bill. I like getting this check in the mail. This benefited me. This helped me. So obviously there are differing viewpoints and differing valid viewpoints, but I think you have seen that pendulum swing slightly back to that end.
So Sue had a great question, and then I'll let you go, Sharon, because
Yeah.
I've taken a lot of your time,
No,
and I really appreciate it. And
absolutely.
I know that Instagram, if it's long, if it's a second over an hour, then you can't post it, and we can't do that. We
Yes.
cannot do that.
Yep.
But Sue had a great question. She said, "Well, what's the motivation for compromise then? Is there a motivation for compromise at all right now? If there are ways to not necessarily work with the other side and kind of push through some of these larger bills?"
I do think the Republicans have some motivation for compromise because these plans are popular and they want to be able to say these plans are popular back home. And so we helped be part of the solution. And I'm not talking about, again, I'm talking about these budget plans, these like the jobs plan and
Right.
the families plan. So I do think that there is some motivation for compromise on their side. And I think the motivation for compromise on the side of the Democrats is not as strong at this point because they know they have that kind of like ace in the hole of like, we don't really need to change this.
Right.
But the biggest motivation for compromise is a gentleman from West Virginia named Joe Manchin. Right? Like he is the he's the kind of the gentleman that he's such a moderate Democrat. He does not agree with everything on the Democratic agenda, and yet because they only have 50 votes in the Senate, they need his support to be able to do anything. So all eyes are definitely going to be on him in like, can we get him to agree with this? He is the linchpin in this scenario here. If he won't agree, then you're going to see the Democrats be more willing to compromise than if he does agree.
I saw that the television camera went to him a few times last night, and he was sitting in his chair kind of like,
yeah, like, I don't know about all of this.
well, I'm going to think about it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good name to watch. A good name to watch. Sharon,
Yes.
Thank you so much for today.
Yes,
This
it's
was
my
so much
pleasure.
fun. It was long overdue. I'm so glad to connect finally this
Yes.
way, and really excited about all that you're doing. So congratulations with all your success. And we look forward to having you back, hopefully.
Absolutely. I'll come
That would
back
be so
anytime.
fun. Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
We'd love to do it. All right. We'll talk to you
Talk
later,
to you
Sharon.
soon. Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm going to go ahead. Do. Sorry, Sharon. I'm like, I don't know. You can just stay there. I'm just going to say goodbye. Really appreciated all your great questions. Such a great audience. Thank you so much. We're going to post this on Instagram. I'm going to try to steal it as well for YouTube and put it on smarternews.com so you can listen to it, maybe even grab it as a podcast as well, because that way you're doing different things, maybe caught different parts of the conversation. But really appreciate Sharon. Continue to follow her on all her platforms. She has so many exciting things going on, and her workshops. She does incredible workshops for people on a myriad of different topics, and you can kind of come in and learn from her directly. So that's great news. All right, guys, hope you have a great day. Thanks so much for your time, and thank you for all your support on smarternews.com. I'll talk to you later.